Okay, welcome everyone to our final webinar of the season for the IC37. I want to talk a little bit first. My name is Philip Lotz. I'm president of the class. I want to talk a little bit about the upcoming schedule and then shortly turn it over to Greg Fisher, our class coach. Just as a reminder, we are quickly approaching the start of the season here. I know it's in, August 1st is coming up, but at the end of August, we have the annual regatta at New York Yacht Club. And then we follow on late September with Race Week at New York Yacht Club, and then the IC37 Nationals in early October at the club. The numbers are looking okay. I think we're going to have about 12 to 14 or 15 boats, maybe start on the low side of that count at the annual and then peak out in the Nationals, or I would say right around 15 boats at this point. So that's looking pretty good. Just a reminder for all those participating, we are adhering to the state of Rhode Island guidelines, so please pay attention to that online. If you're coming from out of state, you have to get tested or a 14-day quarantine if you come from any of the hot states that are over 5% testing or higher. Moving on to the winter, hopefully things will settle down a little bit. We're looking forward to our fall regatta. All three of the winter regattas are at Lauderdale Yacht Club in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. November regatta is 20th to 22nd. The January regatta has moved around a little bit, but for those keeping score, we're now settled firmly on January 29th to the 31st. And then the March regatta, the midwinters, on March 19th to 21. We are planning on a California swing starting in May and June of next year, and we'll be posting those. Those dates are actually up on the website at this point. With that, I want to mention some thank yous here, some very important thank yous to people that have been working on these webinars. And first of all, I want to thank Laura from North, who's been with us from the very beginning. Has provided a lot of support, all the technical stuff, the North Zoom platform, and really helped us with the presentations and organizing this. I want to thank Mike Marshall, who's obviously quarterbacking tonight's seminar and the last two. Ben Kinney, our guest main sheet trimmer general, trimmer extraordinaire, who's going to work with Mike and go through the slides tonight. Want to thank Morgan from Melges, who's also helped in the background on the advertising and everything else. And of course, we have to thank Greg Fisher, who has been organizing this for the class as the class coach. So Greg, thank you very much. And I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thanks, Phil. And thanks again to everybody who's helped make these things so successful. It's been a lot of fun. We are fortunate to have Mike and Ben with us again. This is their third webinar with us. And each time we introduce them and reintroduce them, but they are really special guys. And since we have a number of people who haven't been with us before, I want to do it again because they really give their time and their effort and their expertise to help make this happen. They're obviously super talented, great guys, and obviously, as you'll see, willing to share all they know. But Ben grew up sailing at Milwaukee Yacht Club. He's a Midwestern guy. He was captain of his college sailing team at UPenn and was also captain and chair of the New York Yacht Club team race program, which for those of us that sailed team race is a big deal and really impressive. He was also on the winning Morgan Cup team at least 6 times. He's sailed a bunch of different one designs, but has focused on the Etchells this past 10 years, where he's finished in the top 5 in the worlds twice and was the Corinthian world champion twice. And last year, he helped form the IC37 members only syndicate with Jay Cross and Hannah Sweat. And of course, they won the class's first national championship. And as Phil mentioned, he was the main sheet trimmer. And as you'll learn tonight, he plays a major role in making the boat go upwind that fast. Ben lives in Manhattan with his wife and 2 kids and is a managing director at JP Morgan's corporate and investment bank. And as we've learned this past couple of weeks working with Ben, he is a very busy guy. So thanks again, Ben, for all your time. And Mike grew up on Narragansett Bay and went through all the ranks that young, speedy sailors go through there, starting out with the Optimist, the Laser, the 420, And Mike, too, is a captain of his college team at Conn College, one of the best teams in the organization. He's a champion one design sailor in a number of classes and has won the NAs in the J22 and VX1 and is a world champion in the J22 as well. What I think is really cool is that Mike is on the board of directors of the Connecticut Island Sailing Foundation, which focuses on helping youth sailors enjoy the sport. Mike is the lead sail designer for North Sail's One Design. And just for knowing, and what makes this really special tonight is that he is the designer of the IC37 sails. And as Phil mentioned, tonight is our 5th and final webinar where Ben and Mike will discuss overpowered upwind sailing. It's kind of a cool topic and obviously applies to every boat and is especially tricky on the IC37. In our 2 previous webinars, I discussed light air, 0 to 11 knots upwind, where they focus on crew position, heel, and sail trim to balance the helm. And then a medium powered up breeze of 11-14 knots, they talked about developing consistent speed, setting the sails flatter, and then twist to balance. Balance was super important, while crew weight and heel were secondary. And tonight they're going to describe trim, tuning, and communication in big breeze. And I think it'll be really cool. But please don't hesitate to use the chat room, which will come open here in a little bit to ask any questions you have. We'll be monitoring your comments and questions when we'll pose those to Ben and Mike at the appropriate time. And finally, on the last slide, you'll see instructions on how to access all our former webinars, IC37 webinars on North Sail's YouTube platform. And there are a lot of great webinars there in general, but all 5 of the IC37 webinar presentations will be there. So with that, I'm going to give it to Mike. Mike's going to kick it off and get right into heavy air sailing and sit back. We're going to learn a ton tonight.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot, Greg. That's definitely exactly what we're going to talk about. And you know, as you said, we saw the first week we saw sort of that light air condition, this middle picture here, and the second week we saw this sort of powered up, what you'd call the powered up condition, 11 to sort of 14 knots, and you know, and how you and the changes in the way the crew, you know, what the crew needs to do, how the sails need to be trimmed. And this week we're really going to dive into this heavy air, and really the heavy air condition is one where you're really looking to flatten the sails and you know, depower the boat, just so that you're reducing that drag that you have from sails luffing, and the goal being that your sails shouldn't be luffing. They should be as flat as possible, and you know, at the higher end of this range, and able to drive the boat forward so that you're not slowing yourself down just through drag. So the first thing I want to check in with here is, you know, going to Ben and just find out what from a basic, you know, just a basic boat setup during this condition, kind of where do you think you'd have your setup in terms of keel, in terms of boat speed, in terms of crew weight, you know, just as an overview, so we kind of get a picture of where we're going to be looking at tonight.
Sure. So, you know, you really, Mike, you hit it on the head, and this comes down to, you know, drag reduction as much as possible with your sails. And it goes back to, you know, what you learned in an opti and you know, laser sailing and hitting the controls to flatten your sails as much as possible to reduce drag up top. So, you know, if you start with bricks, you know, in these conditions, you're pretty much full bricks. We discussed bricks a bunch last time. You know, 18 knots of breeze, there's not a lot of debate right now, at least, that you're on full bricks to get as much rig tension as possible to reduce headstay sag. And so full bricks I don't think there's much debate on that. Outhaul tension is something, you know, we talked a bit about last time as well. You know, you are in your full outhaul at this point. You know, there are maybe times where you're looking to ease, but that's a big macro change. And so, you know, you're fairly full outhaul. Your main and jib halyard tension, at least on our program, you know, are fairly firm. And I'd say, you know, as we're thinking about kind of like telltale signs or things that we're looking for, you know, you're probably going to have a vertical crease in your main when you're turned off the breeze, and same with your jib, as a sign that you've got enough tension. That may not necessarily be the sign that you're looking for in other boats, but in the IC, that was kind of a benchmark that we were looking for. Certainly up when you're sailing upwind in proper trim, you don't want any wrinkles in the luff of your jib. And you kind of go from there. You're Cunningham, you're pulling on Cunningham, to bring that draft forward, on your main, and essentially get a smooth luff, smooth luff profile. But like I said, the rule of thumb that we're thinking about and we're focused on is, with all of our controls, really looking for flat sails. We'll talk a bit about backstay and backstay tension as we're going. When you're full bricks, we're going to be fairly full on the backstay as well, particularly north of 18 knots of breeze, and playing the edge of the overbend wrinkles. But I think sort of in terms of other kind of general sail setup, that's where we are. Traveler, we'll talk about this over the course of the next hour or two. Traveler's probably pinned to center line unless you need to have it in a different position for another reason. I'd say that's something we're still learning a lot about in the boat as well. How much in these conditions can you go trap down? And we'll talk, I'm sure, too, about sort of if you're going trap down, what you need to do to make sure you're still charging upwind in those conditions. But in our boat, at least, we really rarely let the Traveler below center line, even when we're full on. And if we are, it's got to be pretty nuclear, and likely means, at least last year, what we were thinking was, if we're going below Traveler and center lines, means we're caught out in the wind range, and that's one of the few controls we can get to when the breeze has gone way up and we weren't expecting it.
Yeah, and so what about a general overview on crew position? Where are they going to be seated?
So we talked a bit about this last time as well. The bow guy is probably best positioned to determine exactly how many crew you need behind the helmsman, but you're starting to stack crew back for sure. You do not want to be digging the knuckle in. For a rule of thumb, you're probably 3 people behind the helmsman at this point. A little bit depends upon sort of the makeup of your crew, but I think broadly speaking, 3 guys behind the helmsman. The one thing, and just to not too much inside baseball, but one thing we're trying to figure out now is, how do you position your runner trimmer so that they can be playing the runner in an appropriate way, and not having to sort of turn back inside every time and come off the rail. So, but I think kind of broad strokes, you're probably thinking 3 people on the rail.
3 people behind the driver on the rail. Yeah,
exactly.
That makes sense. And what about basic sort of polars at this condition? What are we looking at for this 14 to 18 powered up wind speed condition, and how do they compare to the polars on the wall down below?
Sure. So the 2 things I'd say is heel angle, obviously. And, well, this is, my Bible is heel angle and constant angle of heel. We're looking for 22 degrees, kind of 19 to 22 degrees of heel, probably closer to 22 than 19 on average. And the polars that we're looking at down below, and Mike, this is something you and I have talked a lot about, because the polars are very model driven. I would say on average, if the polars are calling for 7.1 or 7.2 in 18 knots of breeze, or 16 to 18 knots of breeze, on the margin, we're looking for a faster number. Now, obviously, you've got a lot of normalization that you need to sort out with speedos and all that. But if the polars are calling for 7.1, I would say on average we're thinking more 7.5, 7.6. So speed is king for sure in all boats. In these boats in particular, we found that you generated height with speed, and so we were looking to focus on slightly higher number.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that you say that, and it does make sense, right? Is that the polar generated by the computer is assuming that you're doing that speed 100% of the time, and in reality, if you're somewhere, your standard deviation away from it is going to be some amount faster than it, and some amount slower. And what that means is that maybe what we found over the course of sailing these boats is that being slower is just so much more detrimental, being in the 6.9 boat speed range as opposed to the 7.4 is so much more detrimental for your average that that for your leeway that the boat generates, that it's better to be going faster. because, you know, your average speed is still getting to that, you know, 7.1, 7.2, even though on the Speedo you're seeing, you know, you're seeing faster numbers. So it could be partly that we, you know, as we talked about, and the other part could be pretty simply that the, you know, that the BPP, or what was used to predict those numbers, is really assuming a steady state model and not one with waves. And potentially there's another influence here where in the waves, the polar is to be going quite a bit faster, because you just need that power surging through the waves. And I'm sure, Ben, you've seen that, you know, in flat water versus non-flat water venues about how high you can sail the boat, especially in this condition, have you not?
Absolutely. I mean, the other thing that, you know, the way I think about it is your margin for error is you know, and we'll talk about groove a lot. You know, your margin for error, if you're going 7.5, is a little bit more than if you're you know, pinched a little bit but sailing 7.1. You know, as you say, you hit that bad wave, or, you know, you have a small shift, you get headed slightly, and all of a sudden, you know, your jib's back at you. So, you know, I'm sure there's something to be said for that too.
Yeah. And so you had mentioned, you know, as we were talking there, you kind of glossed over it, but I think you're, you know, spot on with how important it is, and that's heel angle. And, you know, and you're really so keyed into heel angle, because this is actually probably one of the first times in all the conditions that we've talked about where you actually can heel the boat over the 22 degrees, right? I mean, if we think about it, this is kind of that first condition that we've gotten to. And what does that mean? That means that, you know, we're actually able to, you know, put the boat too far up on its side that it starts to slide sideways a lot more than we want it to. And so, you know, last week we started with the jib, because when you can't overpower the main, you know, overpower the boat in any real major sense, you can, you know, you can trim the sails correctly, and you start with the jib and the main sort of follows. But this week, when you're talking about this really overpowered condition where you can overpower the boat, you have to be easy in the main. So your biggest driver of sail trim is going to be your main sheet and its heel, as you talked about. So really, it makes sense tonight for us to start with, you know, our basic main trim and see what we're looking for during this condition. So, you know, with that said, Ben, how do you, you know, besides just looking at the number and the heel, how do you determine the main trim that you're looking for with the runner, with flatness, with that kind of information?
Sure. You know, so there are a lot of ways. You know, listen, you can get to your boat speed number a whole lot of different ways, right? You know, with point, with heel angle, so you can trim your sails a bunch of different ways. I would say, and this is the third webinar in a row I've said this, you know, this is where like the hour before the start really, really, really matters. You know, these are the conditions that as a main trimmer, I absolutely, like, I live for. I also know that I'm going to be able to, you know, at the end of the day, when we hit the dock, I'm probably not going to be able to raise my arms over my head, because if you're doing, I think if you're doing it right, you know, this is, you know, the main is like, it's far from a static control main sheet, and you're on it the entire day. There are certain things, as we said, so if we're full bricked, you know, we're starting to, you know, we've probably got a decent amount of runner on at this point. If you are finding yourself, you know, with full bricks and you're playing in the lower end of your runner range, then you maybe don't need to be full bricked, right? Like, I'd rather generally play in the higher end of my runner range than the lower end, live in the higher end of my runner range than the lower end of my runner range. But as we get out there and I'm setting up, what I'm looking for, and it's a conversation. So I'm looking at the sail and thinking about, okay, how do I achieve the flat profile without luffing the sail, you know, nonstop. And it's beginning with a conversation with the helmsman. And so in our boat, you know, with Jay driving last year, we would get out, and quite frankly, the first 5 minutes of tuning up is a lot of Jay squawking and squealing and saying that he's fighting the boat, which means that we haven't yet found a happy place for Jay to drive the boat upwind and be hitting the numbers and be feeling fast and with the right groove. It means that we are too tight leached, probably. Our sails are maybe not flat enough. Maybe we're not in the right place in the jib, but I've always found that if I set the boat up too aggressively for heavy air to start, it's going to be harder for me to find that we've gone past the edge. I'd rather start past the edge and back it off until I've found the edge. So it probably means broad strokes, we're too tight leached to start, and we're not flat enough in the sails, and we need to start to make some changes to loosen up our leaches, to flatten our sails a bit more. So maybe that means a little bit more runner. Maybe it means a little bit less sheet. Maybe it means I'm a half a car up on the main traveler when I need to be at the center line. But I'm broad strokes looking for a fairly flat section without going overboard. So if you look at the boats that are, the pictures that are up there, you can see, I mean, these sails tell you when you've gone overboard very, very quickly. There's a very clear reaction function with the main, and you can see that, overbend becomes very obvious very fast. And so as you wind on your runner and the overbend wrinkles show up, okay, they're not necessarily the end of the world, but you can definitely overdo it and essentially turn your main inside out and have, two different sails, so to speak, working for you, right? Where you've got, the top section of the main that's doing, as you can see on the boat on the right, that's doing absolutely nothing for you. The bottom section may still be working, but you're not necessarily going to be going upwind in that, with that setup. So it's a long way to answer your question, but looking for flat sails and listening for a driver who is not complaining anymore about fighting the boat.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple really interesting things that you said there, and the first of which is, how do you know where too much runner is? And really, to answer that, you're kind of, as you said, you're kind of looking at the fact that in this photo, you can actually already see the overbend wrinkle coming through the middle of this, main. And you can actually see here as well that really the bottom part of the main is fairly well engaged with the main sheet, but the top part of the main is not engaged at all. And what's happened is that overbend wrinkle has created a flat spot through the middle of the main. And with that flat spot in the middle of the main, you no longer have depth, which actually translates the leach tension up the sail. You just have a top of the sail that flops open and you have no control over, and you have this bottom of the sail that's hooked up. And so you're really using sort of half of your sail, which probably is great for going fast to a corner, but it's probably not the best VMG that you're saying or that you're looking for. But with that said, it's really important to know where that edge is. And I thought it was really interesting that you had said, and I wouldn't mind you stepping into it a little bit more, but it's the comment of you'd rather go too powered up to begin with and push the edge too high on Jay and make him, tell you that he needs a wider groove than not. And I think that's a really interesting one, because you find that in so many boats, right? You find that if you get out on the water and you depower the boat too much, then it always seems that you're chasing your tail. You're always chasing this loop of, I could be more powered up. I could be more powered up. And by the last upwind of the last race, on race 3, you're finally feeling, wow, I finally found the edge, as opposed to being over it to begin with, where it's really easy to just dial it back a little bit and figure out the fine tuning. But maybe it speaks to that a little bit more for me. And
Sure. So that's, I mean, in the Etchels, it's the same way. We're always trying to play that edge, right? So play that range of, okay, this is just a little bit too much, and back off of it, right? And as we all know, this is a dynamic game and a dynamic sport, and maybe you're coming into a wave set where you need that power back, and so you can get that power back very easily. Or you see, a big shift coming, or a big change coming, big puff coming, and so you can back off. You can back off of that edge. But if you don't know, at least this is always how I've thought about upwind sailing and boat speed. If you don't know where too much is, and again, I'll hear Jay squealing behind me, or in the Etchel Senate squealing behind me, but it's not, I generally know it as well, because I can see we're too heeled over, or we're struggling to hit our numbers, or the boat just feels broadly too bound up. Well, that's a pretty easy adjustment for me to make. It's an ease in the main, maybe it's a burp in the jib, just to free the leeches up and keep the boat charging. But if you're charging all the time, then you're probably not hitting, Mike, as you said, that max VMG, and you're not going to get around the race course, as fast, as high, in the mode that you want to. So, like, to me, like I said, it's in these conditions, it's and let's keep in mind too, I think this is where, you know, having a very dynamic main sheet really matters, because that's the transmission mechanism. That's the fastest, you know, that's what's going to drive change the fastest. You know, the backstay will change things, but that will not translate as quickly. And so let's say we're sailing upwind and we're trying to hit 7.5, and I can see the puff coming and I know it's going to put us on our ear. I'm going to ease into it. And quite frankly, that ease is not, you know, in an Etchells, it's smaller for sure. We're talking about different sail shapes. In the IC37, that could be a 4 to 6 inch ease to keep the boat charging into that puff. I don't want the sail to luff, and we can talk about sort of like what we need to do to the boat setup broadly to make sure that the sail is not luffing into that. Maybe it's a very brief luff, but I can't have all of a sudden, you know, the have lost the sail and lost tension across the sail. But it's really important, at least in my mind, that when we hit that puff, we don't go from 7.5 to tipped over and sailing 7.1 all of a sudden. I really want, you know, if we're going to tip over, I want that to be as little speed loss as possible. I want J to have to feather as little as possible as we're going through the puff. I want to keep the boat going forward, not going sideways.
Yeah, it's interesting because all of that then comes down to making sure the main's flat enough. And you had mentioned your 4 to 6 inch or maybe 8 inch ease that you're looking for there. And you know, we said very early on that the key here is having flat sails that don't luff. What, and speak to this as well, is that, you know, what have you found if that ease is actually 16 inches? That's a pretty quick tell to maybe say that your main isn't flat enough. It's the, you know, the main sheet ease is probably the fine tune of is the fine tune of the final stage. And if you're easing it 3 feet and then pulling it back in 3 feet, no one can possibly keep up with doing that. So that to me would tell you that your sail isn't flat enough. And also it would be a big tell that when you did ease it that 3 feet, the sail would start violently luffing instead of doing what we're really looking for in the top of the main, which you can kind of see in these photos, even though these guys are on, you know, are on a little bit too much runner, you know, or maybe it was the right amount of runner, but it's definitely a lot of runner. But you can see in these photos that the top of the main is quite flat, and it's just gently flopping back and forth between, you know, inverted to windward and inverted to leeward. So, you know, have you seen that in these boats, that when you have too much ease, that is a tell, you know, for too much main sheet play, that is a tell that your sail just isn't flat enough?
Yeah, there was actually an instance, I mentioned this in the prep, that for anybody who sailed nationals last year, the race where that tanker sailed through the middle of the fleet, we happened to be we got around it, we were on port, and big puffs coming down the left side of the course. And I looked around at one point, and I could see there were 3 boats around us whose mains just weren't engaged at all. They were, I think, probably about right around the right angle of heel. It struck me that maybe they didn't have enough vang, and you know, the puffs were, call it 18 to 20, maybe 22, and it was a point where we were starting to vang sheet a little bit more aggressively. But you could see that, yeah, they were achieving that angle of heel, and they were, but I don't think they were going upwind at that point. Their mains were just luffing quite a bit. We'll talk about jib next, I guess. You know, it struck me as well that, you know, they didn't have their jib in the right place, and as a result, they, you know, when they were easing, their jibs were into their main. But yeah, it definitely, you do see it when you are on the race course. I would guess if I had to have a rule of thumb, if over, like, call it a 15 or 20 second period, the main is luffing, you know, if it luffs for, say, 2 seconds, that's fine. And over a 30-second period, if you have 2 or 3 periods where the main's luffing for 2 seconds, that's probably okay. But if it's luffing for much more than that, I think we need to make a change. And it's a sign, okay, we need to do something differently than we're doing right now. And that's the other thing, like, we don't get it right 100% of the time. Nobody does. It's trying to get it right as high a percent of the time as possible. And the boat that gets it right as high a percent of the time as possible is generally going to be going the fastest and making the right course around the race course.
Hey,
Yeah,
hey guys, Mike, can I ask something? When you guys talked in the prep about the main luffing, you likened it to drag and what that would mean as well. Can you guys speak to that? Because whether it's an IC37 or Etchells or whatever, that drag is really going to be detrimental in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think there's multiple ways to depower a sail, right? You can depower it through twist, which is letting the top open up, and that reduces the angle that the sail sees the wind at, and therefore it depowers. But still, when that section shape is up there, it's not actually flat. It's just sort of depowered, and there's still shape in that part of the section. So when it actually does fully disengage and start luffing, that depth is drag. And that was what I was going to talk about with Ben here, with his comment that he looked around and saw some mains that were actually luffing. And they could have been luffing from something that we're going to talk about later, which is the jib. But really the first step in trying to answer that is because you're looking so much to reduce drag. The first step to try to answer that is to try to make the main flatter before you're trying to ease the jib to let the boat go forward. Because as we've said, there's many different ways to slice it. But really, that drag is just parasitic, and it's just slowing the boat down. So, anything you can do to flatten that main section out with it, be it the runner, be it, the other sail controls, which we're going to touch on shortly here, anything you can do to flatten that out is just going to reduce that lift to drag ratio. It's going to, it's just going to make it a better, a ratio that's further in your favor and make it so you can go faster upwind. So, with that in mind, Ben, what would you use the Cunningham and the Vang here, in this condition? Where might you have those set for the main when you were on max runner?
Yeah, so on the Cunningham, we'd already have begun to pull it on. You want to use it to reduce, essentially have a smooth luff and a fairly, we pull it on relatively hard, I guess. We wouldn't be going crazy with it. Sometimes you'd be using it to pull out sort of all the wrinkles for sure. The Vang is one where, I think it's a really powerful control in these boats, for sure. I would say a broad rule of thumb, we talked about this in the prep, and as I was thinking back, I think this is about where we got to. The overbend wrinkles move, right? So they move fore and aft on the sail. They're, depending upon how you have your other controls set. Broad strokes, I would say if you want your Vang on enough to sort of get those overbend wrinkles about halfway back, fore and aft on the main is kind of the again, broad rule of thumb. But Vang sheeting in these boats is a fairly powerful tool. Again, it's knowing where that edge is, and it's in out constantly from that edge. But if you're looking for your overbend wrinkles about halfway back in these conditions, you're probably in about the right spot. And then not to retrade this, but the comment about luffing, I think, is one thing that I often think about is, we want to have as consistent airflow over the sails as possible, right? You want your wings to be working as much as they can over the course of time. And the more you luff, the less consistent that is. And the reattachment process, obviously in more breeze, it happens faster, but it's still, you still have to reattach once you've lost that flow. And even if it's just a second or half a second, it's not as efficient of a wing as if you have it flowing the entire time, or minimal loss of flow over the wing.
And it's also really unpredictable as well, which we're going to touch on a little bit later for sure. So, yeah, and I thought it was interesting. Sorry, Greg, go ahead.
No, we had a question, and I don't know if this is where you guys want to fit it in, from Mark, who sails in San Francisco, and it blows stink all the time. And he's curious about how it would be different, flat water versus lump, if you guys would set it up a little bit different. Obviously the balance would be similar, but anyway, when it's time, would you guys describe what you do there?
Yeah, and I think that's something that we would definitely touch on quite a bit later, and Ben, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would say that in terms of what the boat sees, it's not that different. You're still going to have a similar angle of heel. You're still going to have a similar boat speed, but you might just be a little bit more bow down with a little bit more sails eased because you're looking to keep the boat charging. You need to be always accelerating as opposed to accelerating some of the time. So, what the boat itself sees is a similar boat speed, similar, a similar heel angle, but your sails might be more eased and you might be, you know, just a little bit more bow down to try to keep the boat pounding through the waves. Is that similar to what you think there, Ben?
Yeah, absolutely. If you think about it in terms of groove and the width of the groove that you're trying to set the boat up for, you know, I was talking before about like starting with a very narrow groove where, you know, I've got Jay screaming, I need help, I can't keep the boat going. The flatter the water, the narrower that groove needs to be, right? Obviously, I think, you know, I've been incredibly fortunate to have sailed with some, you know, exceptional helmsmen over the years who can sail in a narrower groove, I think, than your average helmsman. So that matters too. So I wouldn't necessarily say there's a universal for this, but broadly speaking, the flatter the water, the narrower the groove that you can set the boat up in. And if it's lump, and quite frankly, this changes too, right? You know, this is where having a team that's actively thinking about what's about to change, whether it's a puff coming or, you know, actively calling waves. You know, the best teams are the ones who don't just call waves for the first 3 minutes off the line. They call waves all the way up the beat, all the way down the run, all the way up the beat, all the way down the run, so that you can make that change, that you can make that adjustment. And that's where, you know, we haven't really talked about the interplay between the runner and the main sheet. But those are, you know, neither, you know, the runner's not static, just like the main sheet's not static. We definitely play in these boats at least, and I do the same in the Etchells. We play main sheet a lot more actively than we play runner. And but the runner's not a macro. The runner's not a macro tool. You can play it for, you know, you're going into a wave set. You can be playing it if you're sailing into a puff. You should obviously be playing it. What I would say is, if you're adjusting your runner, your main sheet should be adjusted too. You should never adjust runner without main. You can adjust main without adjusting runner, but I'd never go the other way.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. So could you just walk us through a second of what the communication actually is on your boat between the runner trimmer and the main trimmer? Just a quick example of that for us, so we can see it or hear it.
Sure. So we are very religious about having marks on our boat, and actually, you know, being a charterer in the New York fleet, one of the challenges that we've had is, you know, you switch boats a few times over the course of the summer, and as a result, you have to reset your marks, and having a basis for where those are is not always you know, you have to start over, you know, every few weeks. But essentially, we've got on our backstanding, I mentioned this last time, we've got 9 marks on the deck, and we you know, as we're sailing upwind, I'll turn to our runner trimmer and we'll have our base setting. We'll figure out where we want to be to kind of achieve the optimal heel. We'll figure this out in the in sort of our tune-up, and that'll be a number. So just to keep communication, particularly in these conditions where you can be full on and it's loud and there's a lot going on. The communication between me and the runner trimmer is about the number we're on with our runner. And we've got a piece of yarn that we've spliced into the backstay, and we've got our marks on the bottom of the boat, and so we're matching up the mark on our runner to the marks that we have on the floor. So I'll say, Jamie, okay, we're at 7 right now. If we see the puff coming, and I feel like we've got room to trim backstay on, you know, I'll ask Jamie for, you know, go 7 to 8 if we're starting at 7, or if I think it's nuclear, we may need more, and I'm anticipating that. We'll generally trim into the puff so that we're not reacting to the boat after it's heeled over. So like if we see the puff coming and we've got, you know, on our boat, it's Linda counting the puff down or Brian counting the puff down. As we sail into it, we're trimming the runner on. I may have to make a backstay adjustment, main sheet adjustment as we do that. Oftentimes I do. I happen to think that if you are, the main sheet adjustment's more important as you're easing runner than as you're trimming it on, because you tend to be doing that into a lull. But either way, I'm talking to Jamie, who's trimming our runner, about, okay, what number we want to be on, and it's just really clear and concise that way.
Oh, that's fantastic. I you know, I kind of want to be a fly on the wall on your boat for a little bit. But you know, so once you have that communication down, and you have those overbend wrinkles going, you know, general rule of thumb, 50% of the way back, and overbend wrinkles aren't necessarily a bad thing, right? They're just there as a tell that the front of your main is flat enough.
Yeah.
Once you have those going about 50% of the way back, and you think that your main is there, your heel angle is correct, and you go to ease the main because you get a little bit too much heels, and it still is luffing, and you really don't have any other controls to flatten the main. It's very flat. at this point. And that's the case where if you were to take the jib completely out of the picture and you ease the main with the boat in exactly the same setup, the main probably wouldn't luff in that condition, would it? When it was that flat, when you had everything set up correctly, it probably wouldn't luff. So in reality, it's the jib, it's the backwind coming off the back of the jib that's causing the main to luff, is it not? Is that a good way of thinking about it?
That's more often than not the case, exactly. So this is where you're, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was gonna say, like, this is where all of a sudden you're thinking, okay, we're probably in the wrong place on our jib leads. And we need to be making an adjustment on our jib leads. And if you think, I think one of the lessons that, and this is one of the big places where I think we need to recognize we are very much still learning these boats. We're a year into these boats. One of the things, I sail Etchells when I'm not in these boats, and the way that we sail Etchells now is dramatically different than we were sailing them even 5 years ago. And we now move our jib lead outboard in ways that we never thought about before. And I think it's one of the lessons. We sail with our main traveler down in ways we haven't before. But you can't do that if you haven't moved your jib lead outboard. And so that's exactly right. If you've got your main where you want it and you're sailing around with the heel angle, but it's luffing around, your main's luffing around, that's when your jib lead probably needs to move.
Yeah, and I think that's just so critical because there's only so much you can do that when you have that, the boat actually is probably more heeled than it would be with that main sheet tension, right? Because if the jib's in too far, it's actually backwinding the main, which is actually giving it pressure from the windward side and making the boat heel over even more. So it's this positive feedback loop of a negative thing where you can't actually ease the main enough to get the boat on its feet and get it rumbling forward because you just have this super narrow slot that's creating this very inconsistent pressure on the main. Sometimes it's, sometimes you're way heeled over from it. Sometimes you're totally underpowered from it. And so the boat, correct me if I'm wrong, the boat's going to be having this feeling of you can't catch and keep a constant heel angle. The boat feels like it's heeled and then it's unheeled and it's heeled and it's unheeled and you always feel like you're chasing it. And then the main's going to be luffing. And that's really that time where you start to see that might be a place where you drop the car and it just, as you sail these boats in bigger breeze more and more, hopefully over this summer, the fleet might find that dropping the car and maybe cracking the jib sheet just a small amount, but dropping the car to open up that slot really does free the boat up. So Phil, you had said that in a time early sailing these boats, you guys got a little bit caught out in a race. It's a little bit above the range of where you guys had set up for. And you had found that potentially easing the car really freed the boat up. Is that something that had happened?
Yeah, no, it was very early on and actually got caught out into the range where we would usually reef the jib. And we found that struggled a bit, had the same problem you just described. We thought we got the main as flat as we possibly could, but it was not reacting properly. So we moved the lead out aggressively and the boat settled down right away. And so I think we learned right then that, once you get into the upper end of the full sail configuration, you need to be aggressive with your jib lead if you cannot keep the boat under control within that groove. And going back to the question about lump versus flat water, I think that is one adjustment you do make in lump where you maybe you're out a hole more than you would be if it was flat.
And I think that's really important too, exactly as you just said, that, why might it be better to drop that lead in that condition as opposed to maybe easing the jib sheet? And part of it is, one, you free up the main, so your main is really controlling your lead, but two, you also depower the jib without just making the top luff and keeping the bottom trim, which you would do if you were to ease your sheet and not pull the lead down when you did it. And, the top of the jib would just be, wildly open. Or if you did ease the sheet and pull the lead down, then the bottom of the jib is really round. So it's a great way to depower the boat a little bit more in those conditions where you have to get the bow down without luffing the sails. And, Ben, we talked about it a little bit in our prep time, is that, you were very adamant that, and I completely agree with you, that luffing the top of the jib by twisting it off really isn't the way to go. So speak to that for a little bit.
Yeah, no, and I think, listen, some of it goes back to what we were talking about earlier with having, just you want to keep flow as much as possible, but also if you twist off the top of your jib, the bottom part of the bottom half of your sail is likely going to end up way too tight and into your main. So, I think that I'd rather, again, we're still learning an awful lot, but and keep in mind too, the jib leach Telltales in these conditions, I don't want to say are useless. They're going to be flowing 100% of the time. So they're no longer the guide. It really is, you're cueing off of your main, while trying to keep as much flow on your jib throughout, as possible throughout the sail.
I have a really good story about you, Greg, for later when we when we have a minute, about you saying that jib telltale, or that telltale lower down on the main always flies, and you pulled it off the back of the main and said you didn't need it, and that was the end of that. But go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, in our prep time too, and I forget whether it was you, Phil, or Ben, but you guys, it really impressed me when you said the jib setup relative to the main, so it doesn't break up, is so important that if it wasn't right, you'd try to find a way to tack so you could set that lead laterally where it belonged. And, I think so many times we try to fake it and get through it, whereas this purely shows, the importance of making sure that the jib is set right to make the main do its thing, right? And it doesn't matter what kind of boat that is, correct?
Yeah,
yeah. Go ahead, Phil.
No, I was going to say, I think Ben and I both concur on this. It's a pretty important adjustment in these conditions once you have the main set, the way Ben and Mike have been talking, that you need to move that lead out, from where you would normally. And it's something if you get caught out, you can always raise the lead up a little bit, but as soon as you can tack and reset, it's recommended.
Yeah, that's one thing. I mean, Phil's right. You do have a bailout if you find yourself, you're either you're pinned or you need to get to a side and things are changing. There were plenty of times where Hannah would dive in the boat for half a second, just turn around, dive in, ease the lead up, because the way we do have the setups, the boats are set up, you can ease the lead up, but that's not if she's doing that, if we're sailing along on starboard and she's doing that to the jib on leeward, well, somebody's fixing somebody's moving the car out a hole, on the weather side, so that when we do tack, we're in the right spot.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that you say that, because it sounds like that, since the main is driving the in-out jib lead, and frankly, the balance of the boat is also driving the in-out jib lead, your other jib controls really don't have that much range. Your up down on your jib lead, it has a very narrow range. Your sheet has this narrow range of, the upper leech being straight back and parallel to the center line of the boat, or the outside range of that is the top of the jib luffing, which really isn't that much ease from the top being straight back. So then the only other sail control you really have in this condition is a jib halyard to really try to depower the jib. So where are you guys sailing with your jib halyard here?
It's pretty firm. Again, the rule of thumb, you're going to have a vertical crease when you turn off the breeze with the jib halyard. There should be no wrinkles. I guess the draft should be, pretty far forward. That knuckle should be as far forward as you can get it. I think there's a debate as to whether you can overdo it or not. And the 20 of us who are sailing in club boats, the last thing we want to do is start breaking halyards and breaking sails. But I think you can sail it pretty firm.
Yeah, we defer to Phil on that one, right?
Yeah, no, I think you can get away with pretty firm, but you can go too much. I mean, you talked about it, Mike, at the last webinar, one before, about the end plate on the jib. It's pretty good. So, people tend to over flatten the bottom of that jib sometimes in these conditions, where that's not really the solution. You can keep the bottom a little more round than you might otherwise, and but move the program outboard ever so slightly to give your main some room.
to give the main some room, and then really crank that halyard on so that you're doing anything you can to drag the draft forward and hopefully flatten the middle of the sail a lot, you know.
Right. But not the bottom as much.
Exactly. Try to flatten the top, but keep that, yes, exactly. Keep that bottom rounded up because of the end plate that you have.
That's actually, sorry, Mike, and that's actually a good point, right? We talked in the last two of these about trying to match your twist profiles. It's still the same in these conditions too, right? I mean, it feels a little bit more aggro and we're sailing with pretty flat sail shapes, but you know, you're looking for a similar twist profile in your main and your jib, and if you flatten the foot of your jib too much, that's when you lose the top of your jib, and you're probably sailing with a much less twisted main than you are with your jib, and that's generally not the right approach.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the other really critical thing here with the jib is that when you ease it, it doesn't actually get that flat in the top. You know, these high aspect jibs, they get what we would say is tubular. They kind of round up a lot in the top where there's not a lot of directional stability going fore and aft in that top of the jib. So there's a lot of pressure there. So they get round and deep, and especially an AP sail like the one on the IC37, they get round and deep up in the head. So easing the sail so much that it's luffing is just this incredible amount of drag. So, you know, matching your profiles, keeping the leash not too eased, but also keeping that depth in the foot and matching those sail shapes from one to the other is really critical from a boat balance perspective too, right?
Absolutely.
So with that comment and with the, you know, on this boat balance thought, you know, we spent a huge amount of time and we talked in the previous ones that, you know, in light air, it was really about crew weight, getting the sails. The key was crew weight and getting the sails correct, and the boat speed would follow. And in this middle condition, what we talked about was, you know, having the sails trim right, the crew weight wasn't as important, but getting up to this boat speed. And now in this condition, we're really talking about getting to this heel number, this 22 degrees of heel, and using whatever we can out of the sails to actually be able to keep the boat powered up and moving forward is really what we're looking for. Oops, I've gone past that. And so, you know, speaking to that, Ben, and watching this video play through here, you know, what do you see in the look of this video, and what do you see that they're doing well in, you know, with the action in their main and the way the boat's surging through the waves?
Sure, and I've got the benefit of having seen this video before, so the phrase you just used as well, maybe cue everybody to look for while this boat's sailing. The boat is surging through the waves. It's not hitting a wave and stopping. The boat is, you know, you'll see it in a second, the boat is like, it hits the wave and it continues to move forward and accelerate. And I think that's absolutely critical. You know, you asked about sort of the communication before, and you'll see it in a second. You know, when I'm sitting there, these are conditions where I'm head in the boat the entire time, and I'm cycling between main leach, center of the main, speedo, listening for the cues from my teammates about puffs coming. I may look up if a puff's coming just to see, okay, do I need to make a macro adjustment, or do we need to make a macro adjustment? But I'm generally, and if we're aiming for 7.5 boat speed, I'm generally trying to keep the boat as close to 7.5 as I can. If we hit 7.3, I'm terrified of going to 7.2. Similarly, if we get to 7.7, I'm terrified of going to 7.8, because that means that we're not sort of where I think is optimal. And so if we're at 7.7, I know the next tick up is to 7.8. I'm trimming in just a little bit so that doesn't happen, but I'm trying to catch it so that we don't go below 7.4 on the way back down. If we happen to get there, I'm talking to Jay, as you can see the boat kind of moving through these waves. I may say, okay, Jay, we've got a wave set coming. We need to drive a little bit. You've got your ease to drive. But the commentary with Jay, if we've gone, let's say we're at 7.25 or 7.21, I'm going to tell him, hey, you're a little bit slow. Here's your ease. You know, get the boat rumbling again. and it's really just a quick comment. You're a little fast, you're a little slow. And he knows that I'm adjusting the sail. And when I say you're a little fast, I'm expecting him to adjust his, the posture of the boat with the helm. And I've already adjusted the sail. Sometimes you don't need to, and the helm adjustments are very small. And that's actually something you can see here. As the boat's surging through these waves, the helm is not moving a whole heck of a lot. The wing, the sail is moving in and out a little bit. And the thing that I really like about this video is you don't really see the sail luffing. It may pop for a second, but you don't see the sail really holding a luff for more than that one or two seconds. This is also Southern Yacht Club from last Invitational Cup, so it's a pretty exceptional group of sailors on that boat.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. That's exactly as you said. When the boat hits the wave, you see actually the wave gets shed way to leeward, which means the boat's really driving with a lot of power into the wave. You're seeing, the heel angle is very constant. There's very little tiller movement, and that main is just sort of just inverting. It's just doing that sort of floating thing where it's flat enough that it's just inverting from one side to the other, and it's just kind of balanced between powered and not powered. So you're getting some drive occasionally. But the boat is really trimming itself a lot of the time. It's sailing itself. It's easy to sail, and that's, I think, the critical thing that brings together all three of these discussions that we've had. Right? We've had three of these, from light air to medium air to heavy air, and it all comes down to this concept. And each one of those, there are these different pieces that are the most important ones. But it all comes down to this idea of boat balance. And I think that's really portrayed very well in this video, this idea of boat balance. And the way I think about boat balance is, with the groove, right? And so you'd imagine you're riding your bike down in a canyon, right? And the canyon is getting narrower and narrower. And eventually, at some point, it's going to get so narrow that your handlebars are going to clip on the wall. And at that point, there's no recovering. Right? If it was a very wide canyon and one handlebar just clipped a little bit, you'd be able to pull back out of it. But when they're so close together, you just start bouncing off the walls. And that's what you've been referring to, Ben, this whole time about getting Jay to squeal, is that when he feels that all of a sudden he can't find the groove, he's just bouncing from too high to too low. Is that kind of what you're talking about there?
Absolutely, and I think that's applicable in any boat that you're sailing. I don't think it's not just for IC37s. That's what Senate and I are doing in the Etchells. That's Greg, I'm sure that's you in the Lightning. And that's what TP52 sailors are doing. Is they're similar to kind of carry that analogy forward. If you're sailing in a very wide canyon and you clip one of the walls, that might be user error. Probably is user error, driver error. You can tighten up those walls. And you ultimately want to be sailing with the walls as tight as you can get them and still be comfortable without having without clipping them and having the wheels fall off. But I think that's exactly right. And I think that's whatever boat you're sailing.
Yeah, and then to further that even more, that now if you're looking to find what we always call this high mode, this magical high mode to pinch someone off, you sort of have to come back to that idea that if you have, let's say in a normal groove, you have a foot on either side of your handlebars in this canyon, you're really trying to ride down the canyon with an inch on one side, and you have to have, a foot and 11 inches on the other side to be able, if you do hit the side that you're trying to sail on, you have a lot of space to be able to get the boat going again. You can't just narrow it down and expect that you're going to be able to sail on that high groove a lot of the time. Is that something that you guys find?
Yeah, I think that's broadly right. I think the way that I would maybe tweak it just a little bit is, I've been talking about we talk about the groove, and it's broadly conversation between me and the and the driver. There are times in the race where you have to, for tactical reasons, sail with a really narrow groove, right? You can kind of see in this video, it looks like there's a boat to the right of Southern. Maybe Southern needs to get off to pinch them off for whatever reason, because they're started to lure and they realize they need to be to the right side of the beat, or they're getting quickly out to a ley line and they don't want to hang themselves out there. There are times where the tech, in our boat, Benj will turn and say, listen, we need a high mode. We're at a ley line and, the boats are stacking up, on the starboard ley line and boats are stacking up to leeward, and you really need to keep as much of that, as you said, Mike, you want to keep the left option open in case something changes. but you've got to recognize that there are times where, for tactical reasons, you're going to have to do something that's going to make the driver and, quite frankly, the trimmer uncomfortable. And so when you're in that moment, it's how, like, I'm always thinking, okay, the second I can free us up, what's my order of operations to get the boat going fast and back to those targets as quickly as possible, knowing that I've got to make the boat just work for as long as possible in this uncomfortable place.
Yeah, and that really comes down to you know, every one of these conditions, as we've been talking about, that boat balance is key. Everything we're doing to trim the sails properly is to find that groove. We'd rather start with a really tight groove and widen it up so that we know where the edge is, right? We know when we crash, and then we also know how to very quickly fix it when we have crash, or we know what it feels like when we're getting to the crash, right? So we'd rather start with that tight groove. But in any condition, we're always looking to trim the sails and experimenting to try to figure out this boat balance. And in a boat like the IC37, where the keel is so narrow in chord length, and you have to keep the boat speed up, that boat balance really becomes a critical part.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, for a bunch of amateur sailors, you know, I'm a bomb trader by day. That's why we have to get out and practice early in the morning, right? Because it's much better to have that crash, you know, before the start of the first race than halfway up the first beat and see the wheels fall off, you know, and boats sailing by you.
You know, Ben, that's one huge takeaway I've heard from you now, like 3 times, 4 times, is how important it is for you to get out before the start and just sail upwind with Jay and communicate with him and find those edges like Mike just described. And, you know, even at your level and your comfort level and knowing where the main ought to be on this boat and how it ought to be set up on an Etchells, you still take that time to get the groove for that day, that condition, that breeze. That's pretty cool.
So what you're saying, Greg, is we should practice.
It's amazing. that little word, practice. How about that?
Spoken like a good coach.
Yeah, right there.
Hey, just to segue, we have a question about what wind speed do we reef the jib, but it's usually 18 plus. I think the fleet maybe is pushing up towards 19 now, but generally after that, that's when we start reefing the jib, and the main gets reefed in the low 20s, like 23, call it for a number.
Not to hit the practice point too hard again, but that's actually something that we all need to practice more. Our team, very much included, is like, how do you put the reef in? How do you get the sail? Like, you can just throw the reef in and it's, you know, it's fine, but you don't necessarily have a great sail shape if you just throw the reef in. I think that's something that, like, you know, over maybe I know our team is going to work on this fall. Hopefully we'll have the breeze to do it. But you know, what do you do when you put the reef in, and how do you do it in such a way to make the, you know, have an efficient sail?
Well, I suggest 2 things. First of all, just to practice the physical execution of reefing, I would make sure you get to do it, and especially if you're jumping on the boat for the first time, you know, recommend everyone's listening, you know, at least reef the main and the jib once. Find half an hour to go do that. Make sure everybody knows where the lines are, who's going to pull what. The way the class works is we'll fly flags that people, when you get to the mandatory reefing, and then, you know, we'll give everybody enough time to get reefed before we start a race, at least in practice. But I think people are going to feel a lot more comfortable if they've done it once or twice, even at the dock or at the mooring or whatever. Secondary to your point, Ben, yeah, I mean, it'd be nice to get, you know, some 25 knot breezes out there so we can go rip around with reef jibs and mains. Didn't quite get those conditions in Florida this winter, but looking for it. If it doesn't happen in Newport this summer, looking forward to it in Fort Lauderdale in the winter.
I think we all are, for sure. So.
All right. So Greg, I think we're getting to the end of the hour here. You want to be the master of wrap up?
Well, we have one more slide that describes how anybody that would like to see the webinars on North Sail's webinar YouTube channel, to just search it and they'll be there, and plus many other really excellent webinars that Mike's a part of, by the way, as well. And if you have any other questions, there's the email address, and between Mike, Phil, Ben, myself will certainly do our best to answer them as soon as we can. And Ben, Mike, thank you for all your time. You guys have been incredible setting this up, working so hard and sharing all your expertise. And to the class president, Phil, whose efforts are endless. I've learned just watching you this past 6 months. It's incredible. Thank you for everything. And Laura, from all of us, you've made this happen, and we really appreciate everything that you and your North Sails Zoom platform has done for us. So thank you, everybody. And Phil, thanks again. And hope
thank
to
you
see
guys
all soon.
And I want to thank everybody for participating and listening to the webinars. And you know, share it with your friends. And I'm sure everybody should look at these a couple of times before we go sailing later in August. So thanks,
Can't wait to
guys.
get out there.
Yeah, can't wait to get out. All right, till next time. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.